We got a call to investigate a vacant house. What we found will haunt me forever. Written by Rehayahem. The McCullen house stands 3 miles outside of our humble town. The 4-bedroom white farmhouse was built by Hiram McCullen in 1929, shortly after he was elected as a county judge. At one time, it was the cultural hub of local politics. Everybody who was somebody in our city would go to be feted by Judge McCullen and, in return, would open their pocketbooks to ensure that the jolly fellow was elected for another term. My great-grandpa, a county commissioner, talked about how extravagant and gaudy the parties were. "My goodness, was that house a spectacle," he would say. Unfortunately, time is undefeated. The house became a decrepit wasteland after Judge McCullen died in 1978. The judge had no living heirs and left the house in his will to the county. And much like the regular folks living here, the house was soon neglected. It now sits on a hill and rots from the inside out. The fluorescent white paint has long lost its luster and is almost fully chipped off the walls. Most, if not all, of its windows are broken. Years of water damage caused the house to lean to the left, as if it hangs its head in shame. No, the McCullen is no longer the place for white linen soirees. It is, however, the perfect place for mischief. We got the call from Sonia Morris that a stranger was poking around in her flower beds at night. I sent Deputy Stevens to respond, figuring that Miss Morris was afraid of her shadow again. Sure enough, Stevens found a man in his underwear digging through Miss Morris's trash can. He chased the emaciated man through the woods before the man disappeared into the McCullen house. When Deputy Stevens stepped up on the porch, he noticed a foul stench that could only indicate one thing. He then pulled his radio up to his mouth and radioed me. Captain, I think I may need some backup." I arrived at the scene with Deputies Corliss and Howard about 10 minutes later. Stevens was dry heaving by his squad car. "Sorry, Cap. You know how sensitive I am to smells," he said. Corliss turned on his flashlight and went around to investigate the back. Howard followed me. The odor smacked me in the face as I took the first step onto the porch. My eyes instantly watered, and I reached into my back pocket to pull out an old face mask. I banged on the door twice and yelled, "Sheriff's Department, open the door." Silence. I knocked again. "Sheriff's Department, open the door now." Silence again. I readied my shoulder to burst the door when I heard someone scampering down the staircase. I leaned down and opened the small dusty mail slot on the door. When I peered inside, I saw a scraggly, middle-aged woman crouched at the staircase's bottom. Spindly, wet hair clung to her head, and she wore nothing but panties and a tattered undershirt. She glared at me with an almost zealous hatred. "Go away, piggy. You will die here," she seethed. "Ma'am," I said, shaking, "I need to inform you that you are currently trespassing. Can you come outside and talk? We can help," I said. The woman, now shivering, bolted up the stairs and around the wall. "Okay, Bill," I said to Howard. "Let's go in." "Stevens, go and check on Corliss," I yelled. I turned the doorknob, but it broke and rolled off the porch. When we got the door open, the smell was the first thing that we noticed. There's no other smell in the world quite like a decomposing body. I'd compare it to a rotten egg mixed with spoiled meat and perfume, but even that doesn't do it justice. Stevens and I first encountered a dead body when old Ly Tucker passed away from a heart attack alone in his motel room. We found him 2 weeks later. It took an eternity to get that stench off my body, and sometimes I even still smell it in my dreams. What we were about to find was far worse than what we could ever have imagined. We ascended the staircase in silence. Besides creaks, the entire house was eerily silent and devoid of all light. We then hear muffled voices arguing with each other. They came from the room at the end of the hallway. "Sheriff's Department!" I yelled again. "Come out with your hands up, now!" The voices stopped and we heard more scampering, followed by a door being slammed shut. I signaled to move forward and we marched towards the room. Before Howard could kick the door down, it flew open and a naked man lunged at him. I pulled out my baton and thwacked him on his arm, but he was unfazed and wrestled Howard to the ground. "Get him off of me!" Howard yelled. I smacked the man a couple of times again, but finally resorted to my taser to put him down. Howard handcuffed the guy while he was still convulsing on the ground. "Cap, I think this effer is covered in shit," Howard said. I looked closer at the man, now fully conscious and gnashing his jagged, filthy teeth at us. Sure enough, smeared all over the junkie was his own feces. "You stay with him, I'll find the other one," I said. I entered the room with my service weapon pulled out and shined my flashlight around the walls, revealing a tiny closet. As I got closer to the hatch, I heard deranged whispering from behind the walls. "Ma'am, if you're in there, I need you to come out now." The mumblings continued, this time getting faster and louder. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Get out now!"
"Leave this place now."
A deep, curdling voice screamed at me. It hardly sounded human, and my heart began pounding.
"Meddlers will be persecuted."
I took a deep breath, and I kicked the closet door down before jumping backwards to give myself some space. Silence and stillness followed. I gulped and undid the safety on my pistol. "Ma'am, come out with your hands!" Before I could finish my command, the woman on the staircase leapt from the darkness and charged towards me with a knife, screaming. I fumbled with my gun, but Howard put her down with his taser before I fired a shot. The woman crumpled to the ground and writhed in pain. Howard quickly leapt on top of the junkie and cuffed her. I took a deep breath and leaned against the wall. "Thanks, Bill." "Jesus, what an effing night," I said. "When was the last time we had some fun?" At this, Bill chuckled. "Haven't seen any action since that effing biker fight in 2008. I shook my head and rubbed my temples, trying to forget that I had almost had to shoot someone. My radio buzzed. Cap?" It was Corliss. I had forgotten that he and Stevens went in the back. "Go ahead, Corliss." My radio buzzed again after a brief pause. You're gonna want to see this." Howard took the junkies to his squad car while I went downstairs to the basement to meet Stevens and Corliss. Another junkie that they had arrested was in handcuffs face down on the ground. Stevens was interrogating him. Corliss led me into one of the back rooms in the basement. Large streaks of dried blood were sprayed all over the walls. Large round candles were arranged in a circle around the floor. In the middle of the ring was a dead young woman wrapped in an old bedsheet. Her corpse was already beginning to bloat. "Well, that explains the smell," I said. Our coroner and Sheriff Wheatley arrived minutes later to pick up the body. Sheriff Wheatley shook his head and lit a cigarillo. "Well, Pat, looks like Mrs. Morris finally called us out for something real." Wheatley sighed and took a long drag. "Okay, let's go book us them junkies." We hosed the three cretins to sober and then eliminated their stench. Stevens escorted them into different interrogation rooms. We started with the man Stevens and Corliss had arrested in the basement. His name was Travis Aubrey, a meth-head redneck from East Texas who had a rap sheet longer than his toenails. He talked for a bit after we gave him a cigarette. He said that he had joined the other two, a couple, near Houston. They had planned to rob some convenience stores and make enough to score big. "What about the girl?" Wheatley asked. Travis shrugged. "Some hitchhiker we picked up who knew a place to use. Maddie was her name or something like that. That didn't talk much to her." "How did she die?" Wheatley asked. Travis took a puff of his cigarette. "I couldn't hang in, I guess. I think she croaked like a couple of days after we got there. Dewey wrapped her up in a sheet." I shook my head at this. "And you didn't think to call anyone for help?" Travis looked at me quizzically as I said this. "No, sir," he said with contempt. "I guess I was too high. I didn't have nothing to do with that bitch. I'm sorry, am I a suspect? She OD'd, man. It happens all the time." At this, Wheatley slammed his hands on the desk. "Travis, why was she laid in the room with all those candles and all that blood on the walls?" Travis leaned back in his seat and put out a cigarette. "Dewey and Crystal were into some weird stuff. I didn't do nothing." Wait, lawyer. "Yes, sir. I'd like a lawyer now, please. I believe I know my rights, Sheriff." At this, Wheatley sighed and gestured for Stevens to take Travis back to his cell. "Okay, bring in the next one." Dewey Silva was brought in next around 2 a.m. He shifted back and forth in his seat and wouldn't make eye contact with any of us. Dewey, like Travis, had been in and out of jail since he was 16. He also had a warrant out in Pecos County for armed robbery. "We've got all night, son," Wheatley said, lighting another cigarillo. "I don't care about anything else right now. We just want to know about the girl. Who is she, Dewey?" Dewey kept shifting and putting his head in his hands before whimpering. I don't know." His teeth started to chatter. We found her. We found her near Waller. I didn't want to pick her up, but Crystal." Dewey trailed off and began to mutter nonsense to himself. "What did Crystal want, son?" Dewey shut his eyes and shook his head violently. "Dewey," Wheatley said calmly, "we got a dead girl here and we just want to know what happened. That girl may have a family out there that's worried for her. Help us and maybe I'll talk to the sheriff in Pecos." Dewey began to sob and went into a diatribe about Crystal. Long before they had met Travis, Crystal got her palms read by a psychic in Houston. Dewey was unimpressed by the soothsayer. But Crystal wanted to stay around Houston longer to go back. The next day, Crystal returned with an old, dusty book, resembling a grimoire. She said that the witch gave the book to her, but Dewey believed that she swiped it. Since then, the book was all that Crystal cared about. Dewey said that she would only get high with him now because she claimed to understand the spellbook's Latin after they smoked. "What does that have to do with the girl?" Wheatley asked. Dewey shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "Please help me, I didn't want to do it." Wheatley grabbed Dewey by his collar and nearly hoisted him up into the air. "Answer me, Dewey," he screamed. Dewey began smacking himself on the head, trying to calm down. "The girl was gonna be a host." "A what?" Wheatley asked. Suddenly, we heard a sound from upstairs. Hearing this, Wheatley and I raced out of the interrogation room to the holding cells, only to find Crystal wasn't in her cell. And Stevens was slumped on the floor, unconscious. We shook him awake, but he seemed too confused to answer our questions and only pointed to the basement door, which was wide open. The basement door led down to the coroner's offices. As we descended the stairs with our weapons drawn, I felt the most overwhelming sense of dread. My legs began to feel heavy, as if my body was forcing me to turn back. All of the office doors were locked and closed except for the morgue at the end of the hall. When we made our way down the hall, we heard voices that became louder and louder. Sheriff Wheatley raced into the examiner's room and found Crystal sitting cross-legged on the floor, repeating a chant. Her face was pointed up at the ceiling and her eyes were rolled back into the top of her head. The room began shaking violently and the faucets in the sink turned on. "Oh, F this," Wheatley said. He cocked his revolver, and then, with a loud bang, he shot Crystal between her eyes. The room fell silent. The other deputies came running down and stopped in their tracks when they saw Crystal's body slumped on the floor. "Boys," Sheriff Wheatley said calmly, "let's get this place cleaned up before..." Before he could finish, the ground began to shake violently again. Then a whistling sound attacked our ears.
You are too late.
A deep voice croaked before laughing maniacally. The ground started rumbling even harder, and the filing cabinets and medical supplies fell onto the floor. Wheatley screamed, and then everything stopped and the room became deathly quiet, like all sound had been sucked out of the earth. The lights flickered back on again. My eyes darted across the room to the morgue cabinets. Without a sound, one of the cabinets opened slowly by itself. The dead girl's body flopped out of the cabinet and slithered slowly towards me, rising off the ground like a snake. The girl studied me up and down before glaring at me. "Alloweth me to wend, or I shall condemn thee to eternal tirement," she hissed at me in a voice that was anything but human. The thing slithered out of the room and up the stairs, leaving a trail of bile behind it. The five of us stared at each other, unable to muster our words. Sheriff Wheatley took the cigarillo out of his front pocket and struggled to light it. He took a long puff and then closed his eyes. "Boys, let's get the F out of here." We all immediately found our legs and bolted up the stairs. The thing was gone. The trail it left stopped at the front door to the station, which was cracked open. We wrapped Crystal's body up in a sheet and dumped her in the lake. We released Dewey and Travis and told them that they were dead men if they ever came back. The coroner didn't ask questions when we told him that the body was missing. The county didn't pay him enough for the extra BS, and we continued on with our lives, arresting shoplifters and giving speeding tickets to distracted travelers. None of us ever went back to the McCullen house. Still, every now and then, old Sonia Morris will call our station to inform us that strange noises and smells are coming from the McCullen house. I always tell her that we'll send someone out to investigate, but I never do. That house is nothing but mischief.